Welcome to another edition of Nurses Out Loud. I am your host, Nurse Jody O'Malley, and today I have with me four other nurses that you hear from pretty regularly, and also a nurse that probably haven't heard from in about a year, but Nurse April is with us again. She was one of the original Nurses Out Loud a couple of years ago, and I really wanted to bring her in to discuss a couple of these headlines. But first, let me tell you what we're going to try to talk about today and get through. And then also, there's going to be a part two on Nurse Nicole's show on Friday this week. Okay. That we will delve a little bit more deeper into the final report, the COVID Select committee on the coronavirus. They concluded their 2-year investigation and issues a 500 plus page final report on the lessons learned and the path forward. And many of you are wondering if there is going to be justice served. A lot of people are happy to hear that they conducted their report and their findings are now publicly released. But of course, there's not much mainstream media attention to this, right? You're only going to find these types of talks on alternative platforms such as America Out Loud. And just to remind you guys that Nurses Out Loud, we were born from a lot of nurses that either have been awake prior to 2020, such as Nurse Michelle, who is in vaccine court with her daughter, but many of us, like myself and Kimberly and April, and I believe we'll let them all talk about their awakening moments. Nurse David, Nurse Nicole, many of us. Our eyes were opened in 2020, and we have just been loud voices, what we thought were in our little silos until, as God would have it, brought us all together. And that is really the basis of Nurses Out Loud. We're found out that we are in the top 1 to 3% globally on average on a regular basis. So we are having over 500,000 listens every month. And that's extraordinary. There's a lot that we have to say, and there's a lot that we can do as nurses. And so make sure you go to nursesoutloud.com and scroll down to the bottom where it says stay in touch and give us your email, and we will start sending out newsletters and letting you guys know all of the things that we are doing behind the scenes, like Nurse Melissa's Functional Nurse Academy, where we train nurses, Nurse Kimberly, where she puts those nurses to work and also offers the public opportunities to get like-minded healthcare providers to oversee their care. And me, I'm about to release a little special project of getting labs drawn and discussing those with you guys, because I know many of you have not been to the hospital. You don't trust nurses and doctors anymore, and therefore you don't know where you stand metabolically. And so I wanted to create an offer that would be affordable and that you would at least know where you're at and what changes you need to make. So go to nursesoutloud.com, make sure that you are subscribed, and you can hear all of the wonderful things. And also, we're thinking of having a cruise within the next year as well, a working cruise with CEUs. So lots of great things that we're doing. We're also going to discuss how the FDA came out again with where the judge ruled that the FDA must disclose more COVID-19 vaccine records and release more of their clinical trial data. And people are wondering, like, I thought they already did that. We have the book, the Pfizer papers. Didn't that, talk about the data? Well, yes, but what the FDA did was hold back the EUA information, and they thought that that was a separate finding. And so we're going to get into all of that today. But first, let me welcome Nurse April to the show. And thank you for being here, Nurse April. You want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah, so I am a nurse. I've been a nurse since 2004. So it'll be 20 years, almost 21 years coming up. I started originally in labor and delivery, and then I began working as a first assistant in surgery. So I actually work independently. I have my own business, and I assist surgeons in surgery. What else? I make these simulators for surgical education and training. So bodies, because a lot of people don't know is that in healthcare, the way that we get a lot of our practice is on our patients. And so when I was going through my program, I had a hard time with that because I felt like it wasn't safe for the patient or for the provider. And there really wasn't anything on the market. So I started making these surgical simulators for healthcare providers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it. Right?
Yes, that's amazing. These surgical simulators, you can find that at thesurgerystudio.com. Go check that out. Nurse April is not only very well researched, but she's very creative, and it is mind-blowing what she has come up with. Because Nurse April, when you're training as a first assist, or even if a wannabe surgeon, there's not anything quite like what you have developed that was out there, right? Like, how do you get your clinical hours in surgery, right?
Yep. And for me, I was coming from labor and delivery. So other than C-sections, I didn't really see a whole lot of other surgical procedures. So when I went into this, I went in very green. And so doing joint replacements or doing spine surgeries, it was like the first time I'm seeing this particular anatomy was during the surgical procedure. We see pictures in books, we can look online and watch videos, but to see it hands-on, unless you get a lot of cadaver labs, which we never did in my program. We got the computer you go on to Adam. It was a computer program from way back in the day, and you would look at pictures and you learned your anatomy that way. And that's just not realistic. And it really doesn't prepare you for what you're going to be doing in your professional career. So it was important to make simulators that looked realistic, that felt realistic, so you could practice doing those things that require like muscle memory and you don't learn the wrong thing.
Right. And I think for the listeners out there, I'm sure that there are many of you that had no idea that this was not already provided. I mean, we have been doing surgery for hundreds of years. Why in the world, with all of the technology that we have, to be able to even mass produce something like this, has this not been offered? I think, a lot of you, did you know that your doctor is learning, hands-on? They don't have any practice like prior. Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. But what else is mind-blowing is this Blue Cross Blue Shield of Anthem that say that they won't pay for the complete duration of anesthesia for patients' surgical procedures. What did you think about that, Nurse April?
Well, I first heard about that when people were talking. So everybody has heard about this assassination, murder of the CEO of United Healthcare earlier this week. And it was through the comment section and people posting things that this came out into the public. I think most people had no idea that they were proposing this change that was supposed to go into effect in February of 2025 for certain states. And so what they were trying to say is that they were going to limit how much they were going to pay anesthesia for the surgical procedures. So as an example, if you're going in to have a hysterectomy, they may say, okay, And they didn't tell us how they were going to determine the amount of time, but they would say, okay, you're allowed to have 90 minutes of anesthesia time, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
If your surgery goes over, we're not paying for it. You're going to have to be responsible. So it was going to be an out of pocket expense the patient was going to have to take on. And I didn't even know about this until somebody had posted it on X, I believe. And so I think a lot of people heard about it and they all started speaking out. And there was this huge outcry because, of course, that doesn't make sense. It's not fair. Because currently the way it works is anesthesia is paid on a timed basis. So they're constantly delivering medications, but they start the timing in pre-op when they're going over like all of your history and making sure that they have everything that they need, that they're not going to give you any medications that aren't going to be safe, making sure you are stable enough to go into surgery. And then they start, they're recording, they're constantly monitoring your vital signs, giving you medications based on that. And then they provide their services after. So after they wake you up and you go over to the post anesthesia care unit. Mm-hmm. And so their timing is based on that. So before, during, and after. And then they submit a bill for their services based on a total time. Well, so what Anthem is trying to do is give them a global fee, which is what they do actually for us. So for any other providers, the surgeon or your first assist, they will say, okay, you're going to get paid X amount of dollars for this procedure. Let's say you're going to get paid $200 for a hysterectomy. If the hysterectomy is, very simple and quick, great. But if it's complex and you find yourself in a 6-hour procedure, it doesn't matter. You're getting paid the exact same amount. So that's what they were trying to do with anesthesia, mm-hmm. which I don't see how that makes any sense because anesthesia is giving you drugs, right? So the amount of drugs that you're going to get for a 2-hour surgery is different than what you're going to get for a 6-hour surgery. So who's going to cover the difference? Well, I guess they expect the patients to cover the difference. And that is incredible.
Incredible. I worked actually at Phoenix Indian Medical Center. I got hired as a pre-op PACU nurse. And again, you're right. I mean, we are bringing people in like cattle, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. We have got mm-hmm. to hurry up. Everything is timed. If a patient's not in the OR and they have the OR ready to go, I mean, they are losing money. And mm-hmm. and I worked for the government, so they're very wasteful. So they didn't care as much as a private mm-hmm. hospital, but tell them about that, like a little bit, April, so the listeners understand about the surgery. And I want them to really get into that. Yeah.
So the reason why this is such a problem, even the way that they model their payments for physicians and for everyone else is still not a good idea because every patient is different. We were always taught that you're supposed to create custom care models for the patient, right? And what their needs are. And what they've tried to do is create this factory system where here's the average amount of time that it takes for this surgeon to do this procedure. So this is how much, they anticipate spending. And the problem is that every patient is different. And every surgeon is different. So I, for instance, work with a surgeon who can do a hysterectomy. We'll do a robotic hysterectomy. And from start to finish, we can be done in 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, I can go and do the exact same procedure at a different hospital system, and it can take 4 hours. Mm-hmm. So their payment is still the same. And for the hospital system, they're getting this global fee, right? So they're getting a specific amount of money, and that is supposed to cover all of the care that patient is going to need. So the hospital systems are incentivized to move patients out of the hospital quickly. So the less money they spend, say you're going to get $10,000 for this particular billing code, say a hysterectomy. Well, for the hospital, they want to use the least amount of equipment, the least amount of personnel, and decrease their cost. So at the end, if they only spent $3,000, to deliver the care, then they can pocket the rest, the $7,000. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you have a patient that's more complicated and the surgery lasts longer and you end up having to spend as a hospital system, $25,000 on this procedure and all of the complications that come with it, you have to eat the loss.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why you see what you see in healthcare, where people are moving you out like cattle, like hurry up. We want to do these same day surgeries where we're getting you in and out quickly so that they can maximize their profit.
Yeah.
The problem, again, though, with that is that you start to cut corners and it's not safe.
Right.
But they
It's
don't care
not
about
safe.
safety.
No, and
No.
it's really not about safety. You're right. After surgery, you go to, PACU, post anesthesia care unit, and we should have an idea of how long it should take you to wake up and get out of there. But if you have a case that was more complicated, and when we say complicated, most people that are undergoing surgery are metabolically busted, right? For in a lot of right, in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
situations, it is, there's a lot of things that can happen,
Mm-hmm.
and they get them in there, and then they come and they have more anesthesia, so it's going to take them longer to wake up. But we're
Mm-hmm.
hearing over the radio that they're closing the OR and they're about to come out, and you have a patient that's coming out with an airway in place that requires you to be more one-on-one with them. But
Mm-hmm.
then you have, two or three other patients, or four or whatever, in the bay that you're still recovering them, and they're not safe for discharge. I mean, I remember like bringing families back and letting them see and going over the discharge instructions at bedside with the patient. The family can lay eyes on the patient and say, yes, I feel comfortable taking them home, right? Because they know the
Mm-hmm.
patient. And whereas nowadays you have the PACU nurse wheeling the patient out to the front door, and you're pulling your car up and they're going over discharge instructions right there, okay,
Mm-hmm.
where you
Mm-hmm.
don't have the doctor handy. If there's any questions or things that need to get clarified or taken care of, you're doing this in the driveway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's
terrible. Well, one of their arguments that Blue Cross had was that because anesthesia uses this timed model, their concern is that people are overbilling. That's always an issue in healthcare, because you do have your bad actors who will, overcharge the insurance companies, and they'll do it for as long as they can get away with it. So they're looking for ways to, minimize this overbilling issue, and that's their solution.
mm-hmm.
I actually talked to one of the surgeons I work with about this on Thursday, and I hadn't thought about it until she mentioned it. But she said, well, the model that they're trying to create is very similar to how they pay us, where even if our surgery goes over, they're not paying us more. So from her standpoint, she was like, they already do it to us. So I don't see any difference in them doing it, for anesthesia. Well,
Except
we're not happy with it. We're not happy with that payment model at all.
right.
And what it'll do is it'll cause anesthesia to start cherry picking. Like, okay, if you know that you're going to have to work with a doctor who takes too long,
There
I
you go.
personally actually think about this. Like, I'm not going to work with certain doctors, or I'm not going to do certain procedures that take longer, because you just can't make enough money. You can't make enough to survive if you aren't doing a high volume of cases.
Yeah.
And so then patients who actually need the care, especially if you have a long procedure, it's because you're very sick, um, and you need this quality, you're not going to get it, because people are going to turn that down for these faster cases with faster turnovers so that they can increase their, because at the end of the day, we all have to be able to keep our businesses running.
Yeah. I mean, on the flip side of that, I'm listening to you say that, and I'm thinking ER nurse. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times where I show up to work and I'm like, oh man, I'm working with that doc that does full on workups on everybody,
Right. Yeah.
that they're not confident in their
Mm-hmm.
assessment abilities, and they have to get a line and labs and urine and chest x-ray on every single person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so therefore I don't want to work on those days that I know that doctor is going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess in a way one could debate that this isn't such a bad thing, because it's like survival of the fittest, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're automatically going to wean out those doctors that aren't efficient and take a long time. Do one of you guys want to weigh in on this?
What it kind of reminds me of is just how broken these incentive systems are for how hospitals are reimbursed. It reminds me of the change that was made in the middle of the opioid epidemic, where hospital reimbursement from CMS was based off of patient satisfaction scores. So
Mm-hmm.
hospitals that were giving out lots of opioids, there were literally billions of dollars at stake. And they weren't being reimbursed based off of good outcomes. They were being reimbursed off of how happy they were keeping their patients. And
Mhm.
all these different systems just have such perverse incentives that are not patient centered, that are not about good outcomes. It's just so broken. We spend so much money to have such worse outcomes compared to the rest of the developed world.
So true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
They did walk back on this,
Mm-hmm.
and they said that they are not going to do this. And the only reason, guys, is because of the public outcry, that were appalled to hear this. And oftentimes these changes have been made. So historically, these changes have been made in backroom door deals,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
right? And we
Yep.
don't know about them. But
Yep.
now, with people being more, with their eyes being open and knowing, hey, listen, I have to take accountability of my own health, and I do have to do more research because I can't trust them. And hopefully doctors and nurses are waking up to understand that you need to do research, because
Mm-hmm.
what they're telling you is what they want you to parrot. And that's for this, pharmaceutical industrial complex machine to keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
But when
Mm-hmm.
we are discerning and when we are following our code of ethics, and that is professional development, believe it or not, it is in our code of ethics that we maintain, our educating ourselves on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And we're supposed to do that, because we have people's lives in hand. So
Yeah.
that's where I say, if you're a nurse or if you are a janitor listening to this show, kudos to both of you. But I encourage you both to share this information, because, like Nurse April said, it was only because probably that this was in a thread, right? You said on
Yeah.
X, and then that got
Mhm.
shared. And
Yep. And everybody was so upset over that because they were already, I mean, I don't know, we can talk about the reaction that people were having to this CEO being killed, but the
yeah, we'll
comment
pick up on
section.
the second half. We'll talk about this. I have to go to break, but we'll pick up on the second half about that. Any final thoughts from anybody else? I'd like to get your opinion if you want to share it. If not, we can.
I mean, essentially, the bottom line is we are doing profit over patient. And that's what the public needs to understand is that essentially it boils down to the financial, the money portion, and not the safety, the ethics, and the moral obligation we have as a healthcare front to protect the patients by giving them the rights to have safe and equitable care that's not rushed and that doesn't have any, stipulations to it because of a financial, barrier.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, guys, we're talking about chemical free body, and I want to highlight the V stack. This is a sublingual, which means under the tongue, a delivery system of your vitamins, of vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D3, zinc, fulmic, and humic acid. For example, this delivery system that bypasses the GI tract and have to get go through the liver and all of that. This just goes straight into the bloodstream. And it's amazing for people like me that cannot stand swallowing pills. I tell people all the time, if I had to take a chronic med, I would probably be dead because I would forget about it. I just have just the worst habit. And, trying to take 10, 12 pills a day is not what, I'm not about that life either. And it's very hard for me to stay consistent. So I really want to highlight the daily V stack, and go check that out at chemicalfreebody.com/out loud. And you get exclusive discounts only available to the America Out Loud Talk Radio listeners. And we will be right back, and we will discuss how a person wakes up, kills a CEO, rents a bike, an e-bike, and then gets coffee at Starbucks. What in the world is happening? We'll be right back. Welcome back to Nurses Out Loud. And for those of you that are watching this video, you can see it on my YouTube or Rumble channel. We're going to be starting a Nurses Out Loud YouTube channel as well, and Rumble. I am wearing our new swag, and this is our Shining Our Light in the Darkness. And we have other t-shirt designs that a couple of us have created. So go check it out and support us at nursesoutloud.com. All right. So this past week, we had the United Healthcare CEO be murdered in broad daylight. And this happened in the morning at rush hour, I believe. Yeah, it was in New York City last Wednesday. And they had a silencer, this killer that is still at large. They haven't found, as far as I know, as of now. But what we're seeing on social media is this moral conundrum of, is it right to kill, somebody who puts profits over people, as Nurse Nicole just discussed? That's what they do. That's what they did throughout all of COVID, profits over people. And then you had the professionals choosing paychecks over people, right? So, there was gun casings that were found there at the scene, and written on those, allegedly say, deny, defend, and depose. And when my 15-year-old told me about this, I asked him to do a little bit of research and asked, what does that mean? Why would he write that? And he found that there are alleged tactics that insurance companies are accused of using to avoid paying claims. And so, Nurse Kimberly, do you want to weigh in on this? What are your thoughts about that? Were you shocked?
I believe she stepped off.
Oh, did she? Oh, yeah. All right. Nurse Nicole.
Well, I mean, here we are. We have this gentleman who apparently was in Manhattan for a type of conference or some sort of meeting. He's obviously the head of United Healthcare. They have been known to have a lot of backlash due to denying claims, to not approving procedures and different things. They also said that there was some sort of AI breach or gap in diagnosing and approving these procedures and treatments and interventions for millions of individuals, that basically just flat out took keywords out of notes that were made to approve or deny these patients, and I guess just went ahead across the board, and these people lost coverage because there wasn't anything that would be covered. So this man gets gunned down in the morning when he's supposed to be leaving for this individual, obviously, again, like you said, still at large, had a silencer, had these casings that were left, and then supposedly is being found somewhere not too far behind where he committed this crime allegedly. So it's really kind of interesting that we can hunt down individuals that are selling raw milk and things like that, but we can't find a killer who was on camera in multiple different angles in Manhattan. And again, as to what you and April were saying, how it's really eye-opening that we're seeing the response from the public because so many people relate to losing coverage and being denied, life-saving and procedures and interventions and different things that may have had United Healthcare, and have clearly a grudge against this, and rightfully so, because we shouldn't have to fight so hard to be able to receive healthcare, especially when you pay the cost that you do. But also too, like you were saying, that moral, ethical dilemma of a human being just lost their life, and tragically at that, was married, has children, and is now no longer with us. And because of who he represents, people making it seem like it's okay to have these conversations where they're basically saying good riddance and he deserved it and that's what you get. And, again, we saw a lot of this during the pandemic, where we treated people very differently because of choices they may or may not decided to uphold to their, moral self as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's definitely something that I'm interested to see what you guys have to say, because if you're asking me point blank how I feel at this point, a life was lost. It is absolutely tragic. Again, who he was and what he partook in, I do not support. However, we're not a vigilante society. There has to be certain checks and balances in place. And to be assassinated literally in front of your hotel room, to me is just mind blowing. And I can't imagine, that it makes us any more of a higher moral ground to talk that way and put that out there on the internet for all to see, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Benjamin, my 15-year-old, he said, I'm actually surprised it doesn't happen more often. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I'm actually shocked that it doesn't happen more often. I'm shocked that Fauci's still walking around, honestly. It to me, that does say where we're at in society, that we are not a vigilante society, right? Unless the news media wants to promote destroying and, hurting people, as in your form of protest, if you will. But, it reminded me of the movie John Q that came out in 2002 with Denzel Washington. And he took hostages in an emergency room to force someone to arrange for a heart transplant for his 9-year-old son. And, like you said, to go back to what we did and what we're still doing, is you have to have this experimental shot in order to get a life-saving transplant and be on the transplant list. Nurse David, what are your thoughts?
I had the same reaction that your son had. I'm surprised that things like this don't happen more often. And obviously, that's not a call to violence or to vigilante justice. But I think what this situation has shown, what it displays, is that our judicial system is just as broken as our medical system is, because we see people engage in absolutely predatory behaviors without any consequences. And there are so many instances we could talk about where that happens, where an enormous amount of people are harmed, and we know who harmed them, and we know that they did it knowingly for profit, because we have these class action lawsuits where the behaviors are revealed. We have things like the emails that people associated with Purdue with OxyContin and some of their distributors were making fun of the pillbillies who were overdosing to death, and they would say things like, oh, there were only a few thousand deaths this month, that's not too bad. And they would email each other little poems to the tune of the Beverly Hillbillies. Or we have one of our previous episodes of Nurses Out Loud, we had Kim Witzak, who her husband started an antidepressant for insomnia, and 2 weeks later he killed himself because of the side effects. And in the lawsuits around some of the SSRI side effects, we find out that, hey, Pfizer was talking about akathisia in the 1990s, and they internally said, this feeling is so miserable, it's so horrific, that death is a sweet release. And then they decided that they would withhold that information from primary care providers who they were trying to manipulate to prescribe more SSRIs by having their marketing department develop the PHQ-9 depression scale. So they did all those things knowingly, and we know that these products have injured thousands and thousands of people. These insurance companies denying claims have injured so many people, and then the judicial system does not hold anyone accountable. We find out who they are, we find out what they did, and guess what? They get to keep their profits, their careers thrive. So I guess I'm surprised that it doesn't happen more often, because I can just imagine the father or the widow and something like this happens, and then there's no justice, and the people get to go on to sit on boards at Harvard, like well, I guess I won't name them. That would probably be in poor taste, but
yeah, right.
we know the names of these people, and some of them, are CEOs of other pharma companies. The pharma companies have just incredible financial overlap with the insurance companies too. They're all in bed together. Yeah. That was one of the things that started to open my eyes to just how broken the system is when I was working in a retail pharmacy, and every January, when people's insurance would sometimes change, it would result in absolute chaos in the pharmacy, because people's new insurance companies would tell them that they have to switch all their medications. And it didn't matter what medication worked best for them. Right. They wanted them to switch to the medication that their pharma owner manufactured and would profit from. So again, all these systems, they prioritize profits over outcomes. They have hurt an enormous amount of people. Our judicial system is broken and doesn't hold them accountable. And although I do not endorse vigilante justice, no, I am not surprised at all.
Yeah, I think we have, a big opportunity now with RFK Jr. If he gets accepted for his appointment, I know people personally that have been contacted by the MAHA movement, and they truly are trying to get people in there that will do research and that aren't already controlled. I mean, I see it. I see it. I saw it on a small scale at my hospital. Okay, where it was a federal hospital, and when people got in, like me, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to die here. Essentially. I mean, I'm going to work here until I die. Let's put it that way. I mean, I wanted to retire. Let's put it that way. I wanted to work for 30 years and retire because that was like, being in the prime spot. And that's how a lot of politicians think, and we don't have term limits on a lot. And then they get into this like society where they think they can do whatever they want. And you have big pharma that's just pushing money in their pockets. And then they go along with all of that stuff. You did mention something, David, about the depression scale. Well, remember when the pain is the fifth vital sign came out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Middle of the opioid epidemic. Yeah.
Yep. And then Obama doubled down on that. And when he, what was it called that Obama did? With the healthcare.
The Affordable Care Act.
Yeah. The Affordable Care Act. And then when that came out, then hospitals were having to address their pain. And sure, we should do that anyway, right? Because, that's the right thing to do. But when patients left and they filled out a form, if they weren't happy, then they were saying that the hospital wasn't going to get paid. So it was like, you better give them their meds that they want. If the doctor orders it, give it to them. That was what they had told us. If they have a medication that's as needed, and you could give it every 4 hours or 6 hours or whatever it is, you have to give it to them because it's a doctor's order. And it's like, no, it's as needed. dude's on his phone doing jumping jacks in the room to Jane Fonda or whatever, I'm not going to give him his med. Like, he's obvious, you know what I'm saying? But they were kind of forcing us to do that. So there's a lot of corruption there. Nurse April, your thoughts?
Yeah, I do want to weigh in on this just because I have had such personal experience with United Healthcare in every aspect. So from a patient, from the mother of a child who needed a very specialized amount of care that was going to require us to go out of state and out of network because my son was born with this very rare malformation. And so having to fight from that side of the aisle, and then being on the other side as a provider and having to fight just to get paid for the work that you do, and experiencing these programmed delays, because he said, delay. So yes, they want to delay payment. And then they have these, it's programmed into their system, they will automatically deny. So then you have to go back and you have to submit it again with additional information that you've already submitted the first time. So this is a process that goes on for several months for those of us who are out of network. And most first assistants are out of network because we aren't even allowed to be in network. So you already have this system where you force certain providers to be out of network, which means that we're not going to get paid for all of the work that we do because not everyone has the coverage for out of network services. So they're making the patient have to pay for something that they shouldn't have to pay for, because if you don't have the providers, that means you're supposed to cover it. But this is a very long discussion about the way insurance companies work, but they would intentionally program it where you would get, something you would do like a hysterectomy. I'm going to go back to that. Assist on a robotic hysterectomy. It cannot be done without a person at the bedside, right? The doctor's on the console, you have the provider at the bedside with the robot, with the patient. They would automatically deny those and not pay the claim. And so 6 months, 7 months, sometimes a year or more later, after going back and forth with them, they might pay it and then turn around and ask for the money back and say, oh, we overpaid you, or we shouldn't have paid you, pay it all back. So these are the games that they play. And it is such an egregious system, and it causes so much stress and so much frustration. And then on the other side, you see what the patients go through, and you see patients dying because their insurance companies will not pay for claims that they're supposed to pay for, or they won't give them pre-authorization for surgeries that they have to have in order to live. And so my question is, and so when I was all over the comment section on every platform, just, trying to see if I was the only one who felt the way that I felt, because as a Christian, I already know, like I should never, ever celebrate the death of someone. So I struggled with this. On one hand, I'm not supposed to be happy that this man died, but on the other hand, I look at this man who headed this company up, who was aware of these things that they were doing, who intentionally put things in place to create harm, and has so much blood on his hands.
Yeah.
We look at them because they wear suits. We don't look at them as these serial killers, like they're mass murderers, because they're so clean and they're so well tailored and they're so wealthy. We don't see it for what it is. But when you have caused so much destruction, it's hard to feel sorry for this person when life happens. You live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Yeah.
And so, no, he wasn't out there shooting people, but he was causing a lot of people to die. So a lot of people online were like celebratory. And that was actually surprising to me, because it didn't matter what side of the political aisle you were on. Right now, everyone is in agreement that the healthcare industry insurance in particular, is so corrupt that they don't even want the killer to be found.
Right. Yeah. It's wild. It's but at least people are waking up and understanding that they do not have your best interest in mind,
right,
at all.
Right.
I too do not think that, that was wrong. As a believer, I do not condone violence like that. I've had to pray a lot of time that for thoughts, even thoughts that go in my head about Fauci.
Yeah.
Like I cannot stand him. And I'm like, oh, you're supposed to pray for them. Where you're gonna, we're supposed to pray for them more than anyone else, right?
Right. And when you hear about the fact that he might get pardoned for all that he did, then that's the frustration. Like the justice system, there is no justice in our system.
Okay, well, let's touch on that real quick. I wasn't planning on talking about that, but so I guess Biden had come out and said that he was going to pardon Fauci and a couple of other people. And the question on social media was, well, what's he being charged with? If he hasn't been charged with anything, how can you preemptively be like, oh, he's pardoned? So if you charge him with anything, he's pardoned. Like, what do you guys think about that?
Well, they're doing blanket. What he's doing is these blanket, like what he gave his son, this blanket pardon over a span of years. So I think it was over 10 or 11 years or so. So anything that he did, even though it hasn't been litigated, he hasn't been charged, it doesn't matter. Anything he did in that time span will be pardoned. And so I think that's what he's going to try to do with a lot of these other corrupt politicians, and Fauci is given these blanket pardons so that you can't go after them. And to me, that is what's going to cause this vigilante system that they don't want.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Hunter, he gave him a blanket pardon back to 2014. So that right there is a giveaway. This isn't about the federal gun charges. This isn't about his drug use or anything like that. This is about his involvement in Ukraine with Burisma, with the Biden family business of influence peddling. And that's what this Hunter Biden pardon is all about. That's why it went back to January 1st, 2014, is because that's when Hunter Biden started on the board of a foreign energy company in an industry he knows nothing about, in a language he doesn't speak. That's what that pardon is about. And when they're talking about pardoning Fauci and other people, so they haven't said anything publicly yet. It's all speculation at this point, but we do know that Fauci broke the law in a multitude of ways. We know that he perjured himself to Congress when he said that he wasn't funding gain of function research. That's a crime. We know that Fauci and people associated with him actively evaded FOIA through using their private emails. That's also a crime. We know that they conspired to put down the lab leak theory, that what they were saying publicly was completely different than what they were saying privately. And then they used what they said publicly to censor people who were talking about the lab leak theory. So again, that's another crime. That's a First Amendment violation. So yeah, I hope that they are held accountable. Again, I think if history is any indicator, they won't be. I have hopes that with this new administration, maybe we'll see some changes, but we need drastic reforms, not just within the medical industrial complex, but also at the Department of Justice for us to actually see some progress and to see justice held on these issues. So, and my understanding too is that even if Fauci is pardoned, that would only be for whatever crime he's convicted of, but he could still have a trial. It just wouldn't have any teeth, but that still might be therapeutic for us to witness, for him to go through the process of being sat down in court and having his crimes revealed to the country, even if he's not going to spend the rest of his withered, miserable years in prison like he should be.
Yeah. Recently, in my truth movement, we did discuss that this is December and this is the holiday season, and there still, are many people that are not around the table anymore. And because their lives have been taken in one way or another, whether it be from the vaccine or the hospital protocol. And there's a lot of anger still, and there was a lot of hope as well. But here's the thing that I try to tell people, and I hope anybody listening here that this helps you. We're this world, this life is so short, guys, like literally so short in eternity. And one breath separates us from here to our eternal resting place, right? Are we going to go to heaven or are we going to go to hell? Believe what you want. That's what I believe. And we can't be spending our time here focused on the anger of it all. Like literally, we have to just give that up to God and let him handle it. And then that peace that surpasses all understanding, will help us to move on. I mean, I too have been very affected physically and mentally. Spiritually, I've grown, but mentally and physically, I, have been affected. And I know all of you guys have, even if you haven't lost anyone. But we can't focus on, needing that justice to move forward and, and just feeling that in our spirit. Try really to pray, ask God, give it up to him, and ask him to come in and work through you and help you to heal from that. But we only have a couple of minutes left, like literally, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. So I want to touch on here. We're not obviously not going to get to the subcommittee report. You'll have to hear that on Nurse Nicole's show on Friday. But this headline that the FDA must disclose more COVID-19 vaccine records, the U.S. judge rules. This is still the court case from the one that you heard a couple years ago, where the FDA was asking the judge to hold the Pfizer documents for 75 years before releasing it to the public. And everybody's like, oh, this is old news. No, this is new news, because from the way I understand it, when they released those documents, they held out the emergency use authorization file. Okay. And we'll get into that. Hopefully we'll get into that with Nurse Nicole a little bit more. But the emergency use authorization was what allowed this experimental shot and biologic agent, right? Because not only was the technology experimental, but so too was what was in it, those lipid nanoparticles and the mRNA technology. That was all experimental. And they were able to do all of this because of the emergency use authorization. And people don't understand that, that where we have a problem, a huge problem, and why, for me, I like blew the whistle in the manner in which I did, and the rest of us, blowing the whistle and speaking out loud about it on social media, was because they were saying it's safe and effective. And we're like, how can they possibly say that? There is no long-term data. And therefore, the people that kept parroting safe and effective, they did not give their patients informed consent, right? And that is a violation of the Nuremberg Code or of medical ethics. And then them coercing people to choose their paycheck over people, right? Or their paycheck. If they didn't want to take the shot, they were going to get terminated. That was a violation of the Nuremberg Code as well. And so, this is a big deal. All of this stuff is coming out, and it has been. And that's why we are here on air 5 days a week, because there is so much that we can discuss every single day. There is more truth coming out. And I want to direct you guys to one place. This holiday season, when you're having conversations with your family and your friends, and people want to have an emotional conversation, just direct them to icandecide.org. Okay. That, I think, if there was one spot that I would just repeat over and over again for people that are not awake and that have been propagandized, therefore losing their ability to critically think and logically reason, icandecide.org is a list of all the lawsuits. They can read up on there. They can read the facts of everything that has, from Aaron Siri primarily, and the highwire.com. Aaron Siri is the attorney behind a lot of these lawsuits. So follow them, and then also follow americaoutloud.news. We are on air 24/7 with our world-class media player. If you went to americaoutloud.news, or you can download the America Out Loud Talk radio app and you can listen 24/7. We air at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And all of our shows go to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora. We're on a lot of them. And so we thank you. I thank my nurse co-host for coming in and chiming in on this today. And check out nursesoutloud.com, guys. And until next time, friends, be safe, be well, and God bless.